Welcome to Stand Up to Stand Out, the podcast, where we help you master clarity, confidence, and influence.
Join over 10,000 listeners worldwide and unlock the power to turn your goals into reality.
This podcast is designed to bring you insights from the industry and some inspiration to get it done.
At DNA, we believe that better communication leads to better outcomes.
So let's dive in. Dr. Karen Carrasquillo Miranda began her scientific journey in Puerto Rico, where she earned a PhD in chemistry. Her path led to ophthalmology before she pursued her doctor of optometry. Today, she's a senior leader at BostonSight and the founder of FitAcademy, connecting her early passion for science with innovative approaches to eye treatment and education. Today, we talk about purpose, connecting it with values. We talk about impact. And of course, we get into the science of the eye. Join us for a fascinating discussion where I hope you'll get some inspiration about aligning towards your purpose. First of all, Karen, I just want to thank you for being on the show. I'm very excited to dive in. So why don't we start in the beginning? I'm interested in who or what drew you to science in the first place.
Well, first of all, Stuart, thank you for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for what you're doing with the NATE, and congratulations. I love it that you're being a champion for so many professionals and potentiating our voices. So thank you. Science. I've been drawn to science. Literally, this may sound like a cliche, but since I was a kid, my dad, it also helped that my dad was, or still is a math professor. So sort of STEM was spoken about, at the home front. And I was always interested. And so with that frame, chemistry really became very interesting to me after high school introduction. I said, instead of pursuing some basic science that require more memorization, leaning into more of the analytical side of science, which chemistry afforded that seemed like a natural fit for me.
So how did that lead you to eyes and ophthalmology?
It's a great question. And I've been asked that before. And even though it seems like it just doesn't match for me, it was a very natural progression. As much as I was interested in science and chemistry, I also had this unique interest in the eye. I remember going with my parents to the ophthalmologist and just seeing how they would approach the care and the instrumentation. It seemed fascinating to me. And as I learned a little bit more about the eye and knowing that it's the unique structure of our body that you can see through it, through the pupil and see the vasculature without really having to cut through the skin, right? It seemed fascinating to me. And I didn't really quite think of medicine, to be honest, even though I was interested in the eye, because to become a medical doctor, you had to go through all the different disciplines in medicine. And for me, it was the eye that I was uniquely interested. So I thought, well, perhaps a career in research, in particular in eye research, I could mesh these two. In particular, chemistry has some subfields like biochemistry. And I thought, well, maybe between these two, biochemistry and then pursuing some form of research in the eye. And that's what ultimately I did through my PhD, developing drug delivery devices. And eventually it brought me here to Boston to pursue my postdoctoral research fellowship at Mass Eye and Ear Infirmary, where I was able to work on creating drug delivery devices for ocular drug delivery. It wasn't until then that I thought, well, this is it. I'm pursuing my dreams. I was very grateful for the opportunity to be here in Boston, but being with cornea fellows and researchers that were clinicians as well at Mass Eye and Ear gave me a whole new insight. And once I started to become more familiarized with the fact that the impact that we could have with patients, I learned about an amazing program in Boston that, Stuart, to be honest, I just felt like it was meant to be for me because it allowed me to study optometry, become a clinician, but it's the only program in the nation that has a program for folks like me. If you're a PhD or a medical doctor from another country, you could pursue this accelerated program and then become a clinician in a more concise manner. And I just felt, okay, this is for me. I'm in Boston. I have this interest. I felt like it was for me, so I pursued it.
I love that. There's so much I want to get to there, but I want to go back a little bit to understand the transition and learning about just the eye in general. And I'm just going to be a student here because I remember listening on a podcast recently about that eyes are actually the only real interface between the brain and the outside world. And that it's actually, you can intuit quite a bit. And I never thought about it. And I thought, well, here's someone has a deep expertise and an advanced degree and a PhD. So maybe you could just, for our audience and my sake, frankly, what did you learn or what have you learned in your career and postdoc about the eye that many people may not know? And then, of course, we'll get to, drug delivery and BostonSight and all that. But just with some of the basics, because I find this a fascinating field that I know very little about.
Well, first of all, you just said it right there. The visual process is actually a neural process. It starts with light. We need rays of light in order to initiate the visual process. But, those rays of light get straight back to the back of the eye. There's a structure called the optic nerve, and that is connected to an area of the brain. I don't mean to get too technical, but it's called Area 18, and that's how the visual process is. So that's one thing that many people do not realize. And it's just amazing, the intricacy and how, perfect nature is, in my opinion. And the other thing that I think it's one thing that people don't realize, what I just said earlier, is the only structure in the body where you can look into through the pupil and see the back of the eye and see the entire vasculature. And by looking and analyzing the vasculature, we can actually help diagnose systemic conditions. For example, if I see plaques in the back in some veins or arteries, there could be a sign that someone may have perhaps hypertension, or perhaps that their diabetes is really out of control because of the signs that I'm looking at the back of the eye by looking at that vasculature. It's truly amazing. If anybody that is listening, just has the opportunity to look at the back of the eye, I think everybody would fall in love just like I did. It's just amazing.
So let's get there. The vasculature in the back of the eye, you can see if there's conditions of plaque that could indicate hypertension or others. How vast is your ability to, see signals of various diseases and others? Like, how deep can it go?
It could. You can see sometimes, leaky blood vessels, some metabolic diseases. So it is possible and in fact, it's not rare. It's not too common, but it's not rare at the same time that a patient will come to the eye doctor for the visual exam because they cannot see well. And they might think, in our case, we specialize in the front of the eye, in the cornea. But I've seen patients that come to me for scleral lenses, they're thinking front of the eye. And when we look deeper and then we do the medical history and we know that there are systemic diseases that are concomitant for this patient, we realize that has nothing to do with front of the eye, that it's not really related to the scleral lens. But in fact, when we look at the back of the eye, there's some leaky blood vessels that we're seeing, or some damage to the structure of the optic nerve, for example, that requires a referral to a glaucoma specialist because it might be something related to glaucoma, requires a referral to a retinal specialist, or, as we're talking about, to their primary care provider, because it could be a sign that, hey, perhaps your metabolic disease is at disarray, and your diabetes is probably not well controlled. And so you need, not only to take care of what's happening in the eye, so it requires a referral to a specialist there, but it certainly requires a referral to the primary care physician to titrate and better control those systemic, the systemic disease itself.
So I'm going to pick up on that theme and talk about this element that I hear many of my guests and clients talk about, which is just broadly teamwork between different specialists. You're talking about primary care physicians or other specialists. Tell me about your world at BostonSight, and we'll get to FitAcademy soon too, how much of a team sport it is, and how do you think about that with you and maybe your team in terms of giving the best patient experience possible?
To be honest, we truly model that teamwork approach that you just mentioned. We focus particularly in the front of the eye, and the cornea and the surface of the eye. And so we have a corneal specialist in the office and in the organization. He's our chief medical officer. I have a group of optometrists that I lead. And so in total, we're 4. And in order to provide the best patient outcomes, we definitely is a collaborative approach. So if we speak about BostonSight, about the clinical part, there's already a collaboration of between MDs and ODs, or medical doctors and optometry doctors. But in our organization, because of what we do, because we specialize in a particular medical device that is called a scleral lens, we have a manufacturing laboratory. So that means that we have software engineers, we have lab technicians, manufacturing technicians, and a group of amazing skilled ophthalmic technicians that help us with our patients. So it's truly a collaborative approach. Outside of our walls, then, we collaborate with other specialists like glaucoma, bone marrow transplant doctors, rheumatologists, etc. And you do need that collaborative approach to ensure that our patients are getting the best outcomes, for sure.
So let me ask, what gets in the way of that, maybe internally and externally? Because in a perfect world, there is this collaborative approach because life is a team sport, no matter what. So I'm curious, though, because, just what gets in the way of that from your lens that's solvable? Because there's things that are systemic that maybe are not easily solvable. But do you see anything getting in the way of optimal collaboration across different functions?
Yeah. What comes to mind, and I don't think this is the majority of the cases, but I do know that in some cases, some clinicians don't refer out, maybe for the fear of losing the patient. Because if you refer out, maybe the patient won't come back to you, right? In our case in particular, we are specialists. So we do not take care of the primary care aspects of the patient. So we're always referring back to their either primary medical doctor for the eye, it could be an optometrist or primary care ophthalmologist, or to a specialist. And they always refer back to us because we're so specialized. But I've seen sometimes a lack of collaboration, maybe for the fear of losing the patient. And again, I do not believe that this is in most cases, but I can see that sometimes not knowing what you don't know, although I do believe that is less and less these days.
It's such a funny thing you mentioned that, because I often have referred to you don't know what you don't know, which always takes my brain an extra beat to consider what that is, but it just softens your position. And to paraphrase Paul Sappho from Stanford, says you have to have strong convictions, but weakly held to collaborate. So you believe what you believe, you've looked at the science, but you have to not hold on too tight. So I see that as someone holding on a bit tighter than they may need to because of incentives or fear. Who knows?
Absolutely. That's a great point. Absolutely.
So let's just initiate me and hopefully most of my audience, unless they're experts here. Can you explain in just simple language what scleral lenses are and just give us a primer on this? And then let's talk about your work at BostonSight.
Yeah. So scleral lenses are medical devices. You can think of them as a contact lens, but the word contact lens can be a misnomer because the word contact implies that it's contacting perhaps the cornea, right? Most contact lenses sit on the cornea or over the cornea. So a scleral lens is a plastic lens. It's rigid in nature. It's about the size of a quarter, but it sits in the white part of the eye, which is called the sclera. It's a very robust tissue. It's made up of collagen. There's no nerve endings in the sclera. So when you have something that, despite the fact it's rigid, lands there, it's pretty comfortable. the lens vaults over the cornea. The cornea is where we really have the nerve endings. It's actually one of the most sensitive, if not the most sensitive tissue organ of our body. So by vaulting the cornea and not contacting the cornea, it's actually a very comfortable lens. And in addition, the lens is filled with preservative-free sterile saline. And we use it, Stuart, for primarily two pathways or two purposes or applications, if you will. One is to rehabilitate the vision in cases of extreme distorted corneas or irregular corneas that can render a patient legally blind. So we can rehabilitate the vision in these cases. The other, because of this fluid reservoir that I mentioned to you, is to treat ocular surface diseases, which in many cases, if you have never heard of this, consider yourself a lucky and a blessed person, because these are very debilitating and in many cases blinding diseases. For example, one of the ones that we treat often is severe dry eye. And you can think, oh, dryness, how debilitating it is. It's extremely debilitating. And, just by putting that lens that it doesn't move, it just holds that reservoir, it implies immediate relief, immediate comfort, and as a secondary, in many cases, as a primary gain, is rehabilitating your vision. We take you from a legally blind, like 2200 to 2020. So we are literally, Stuart, reclaiming, like changing patients' lives and reclaiming their lives. That's part, like a tagline that we use in our clinic. And it's really not a cliche. I mean, it's such a powerful, active verb, because we see it in the clinic every day. It's amazing.
So what is the tagline? I don't know if I heard it fully.
So it's restoring sight or restoring vision, reclaiming lives.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
Well, we all take vision for granted until it's no longer there. And oftentimes I give my clients, because in my world it's communication. And one of the things that I try to give as an analogy to my clients is, I said, okay, imagine you're in your bedroom or some room you know well, and I ask you to close your eyes. Could you find your way through it? And they say, absolutely. I do it every night. I said, now imagine I dropped you in another room and your eyes are still closed and I asked you to move with the same speed. You couldn't do it. You would find your way through it. And I use this as an analogy for explaining a domain to someone who doesn't know. You have to go a bit slower and wayfind along the way. You have to put your hands and feet out metaphorically. But I think about that with vision, that anytime anyone's vision has been compromised, it is the most disorienting, scary feeling. And people who lose vision, it's life-changing. So reclaiming lives is right on. And I'm curious, I mean, in your career, you must have dozens, if not hundreds, but are there any patient stories that really stick out with you as just something special? And of course, protecting their anonymity or privacy. But I'm just curious if you have any personal stories that hit you particularly close to home.
There are many, thankfully. I have many, and which is one of the reasons why I really love working at BostonSight, because it affords me an opportunity for me to be grateful. I mean, I feel grateful for working where I work, right? And I think it's an immense privilege. But two that I can think of right out of the bat. One in particular was a kid from Puerto Rico. The fact that not only I have the fortune to have the skill set that I have and the training that I have, but also the fact that I'm bilingual, I'm able to impact lives even further by being able to understand the idiosyncrasy and the cultural competence of some of our patients by also being Hispanic. And this kid struggled through many different doctors, had a diagnosis of ADHD, hyperactivity, issues with learning, quote unquote learning disabilities in school. And this kid was legally blind when the kid came to see me. And not only was I able to connect on a cultural level, the language, because English was a barrier for the patient and the parents, But when we fit, or I was able to fit this patient with this customized devices, and I brought this patient back from legal blindness to 2030, which is close to 2020, which is the gold standard, the patient's life changed dramatically. This diagnosis of hyperactivity was no longer. This kid was highly medicated, no longer. The kid was hyperactive because the kid could not focus, because the kid could not see. How do you want someone to focus if they cannot see? It's the same thing. And when I work with students, and something that I was taught in school is you should not diagnose hyperactivity disorders or learning disabilities if you have not ruled out two things, visual problems and auditory problems, because how can someone focus if they are not listening properly or they cannot see well? And I remember this kid came with a social worker. It was a very high involved kid, super hyperactive. The mother she felt bad because the kid was sort of pretty jumpy. And I said, let him. As long as I'm able to do what I need to do, just let him. And 3 months after, the kid returned to Puerto Rico, and I got a letter from the social worker saying, it's amazing what these devices are doing for this kid, no longer in medication, and just the whole outlook for this child changed and improved. And now, not a learning disability. Now the kid can see. So now he can focus and he can properly study. So that's one case in particular that I can tell you that it was so moving, touching, that I felt, what a privilege I have to do what I do.
Yeah, it not only hits me emotionally, but also how often does this happen where we're just looking at the problem the wrong way? And I love that principle that can we just write off the first box is the ability. Do we have the ability to hear or see or participate? And then let's talk about skills and behaviors. But let's not do that until we're clear that someone has the ability. So you bringing them back that ability changed this young person's life. So it's moving.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one more question at BostonSight, but I really am excited to get into FitAcademy. And, this is a naive question. So if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But if you could wave your magic wand and fix one challenge with the eye or with vision, what would that be?
That's a very good question. And I would define it with one word, Stuart. I can talk to you about so many conditions that are blinding conditions, etc., right? But at the heart of it, it all comes down to access. That's how I would define it. If I would have a magic wand to address a particular challenge with vision, would be access. So that regardless of what condition it is that you have, it could be the front of the eye, back of the eye. But as you said it earlier, the vision is the window to the world. So if we can address access so that access is not the rate limiting step or the barrier to entry for patients to receive either the treatments or innovations that they require to restore the vision, and as we said, to reclaim their lives, that's what I would do. That's what I would use that magic wand for, is remove all barriers to access.
So let's talk FitAcademy, because to me, especially when I see, posts online and stuff, it just fills me with joy to see you're in all parts of the world sharing what this is. So let's just get the audience on board. What is FitAcademy? Where did it start? And let's just go from there.
Thank you for following the journey. I follow yours, and it's truly amazing to see what you guys are doing as well. So FitAcademy is an educational program that hits at the core of what BostonSight is. So BostonSight is a nonprofit organization founded over 35 plus years ago. And because we're pioneers in what we do, which is scleral lens design, we're patent holders. We have done so many breakthroughs and pioneers into this technology. There's so much collective knowledge in this particular area. And the way we approach patient care, which is in a patient-centered manner, and this collaborative approach, there's so much collective knowledge. And at the heart of the nonprofit mission for BostonSight, there are two core principles. It is innovation and education. to me, that was a perfect organization also to work with or for, especially given my background as a scientist, where, in the science world, in academia, if you pursue academia, one of the main goals is to follow the evidence or learn a particular, research a particular subject and pass it forward. You really want to share what you've learned, what you investigated, what you found, you share it. That's what moves you. And so we talked about how my initial career was, or my background is a science background. So I come to BostonSight. That's a core mission is education. So around 2019, it was a pie in the sky for me. We were at a position where we have our own designs, and we have a network of doctors in the United States, in India, but we wanted to create a new design so that, again, access was not a limiting factor for patients to benefit from our technology. So on the technology side, we were doing great strides. But one thing that I approached my CEO with is how amazing it would be if we can gather. I started with cornea and contact lens residents and fellows from all over the United States and Canada. And I told her how amazing it would be if we could gather all of these residents from all the states and Canada, bring them to BostonSight, and provide them with education so that all this collective know-how that we've gathered over 30 plus 5 years is not just kept within our walls or our own network, so that we can potentiate our impact downstream. What is at the heart of it is patients. So I said, wouldn't that be amazing? But for that, we knew that because of, salaries of residents and fellows, it's not a lot when you're in training. So ideally, we wanted to do this in a way that we could cover their expenses. And we knew that for that, we needed to lean in on industry and to the generosity of donors. For example, the John Henry Family Foundation was from the get-go one of our primary donors, and who supported us to launch this initiative. And so that's how it started. We've been doing this for 7 years now altogether, but it has since branched from cornea and contact lens residents, taking it to establish practitioners through immersive education in our clinic, but also internationally. We've been to Colombia in 2024, and this year I just came back from India, and we have many other countries that were slated. And at the heart of it, Stuart, is passing it forward. It's potentiating the impact and the knowledge that you have accumulated and empowering others so that downstream, which is patients, benefit from what we've learned. And so others can learn that as well, and patients can benefit.
What resonates for me, Karen, is accelerating and amplifying access.
That's it.
Because that theme of access, this is that, but amplified and sped up to get everyone to be that agent of access.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah. And it's such a special thing. You've talked about potentiating that knowledge base, that, this is to be shared and curated globally, that this is something that is a source of intellectual property for all to benefit from.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
very, very privileged.
Well, I love that, because it's a fascinating career that you're having, because for me, from the outside, it seems from the deepest research in chemistry to connecting globally, you really, in such an elegant and powerful way, go between, deep science, but also global outreach. And it just seems very uniquely suited to you as you evolve and grow with it as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, you might think, these two careers may seem completely opposite, but for me, it was my journey. I think it's a meant to be journey, because, if we think about what science affords you, is just that critical thinking, leads you to ask questions, interpret data, learn how to interpret data, follow the evidence, right? That helps provide you the framework, not only how you approach patient care, but you say globally, one step that I left in between, at the end is the education piece. But to potentiate that global impact, one of the things that I was very fortunate to be part of is to lead. Around 2014, we started the journey, but we launched in 2017. We launched a new scleral lens design that could be commercially available worldwide, globally, again, to promote that access. And at the time, I could have taken the approach to lead the team, and just like any other manufacturer in the industry would approach product development, or at least scleral lenses. And so maybe reach out to do a focus group of experts, starting with our own and then beyond, perhaps lean into our network of providers and say, hey, what does a good scleral lens design, in your opinion, might look like? And let's, get those ingredients and craft a design. I could have done that. But because of the science background and that approach to let's lean on data, interpret data, and follow the evidence, I knew that I was in a unique position to leverage a unique organization. We have a clinic. As we mentioned before, we have a laboratory. And I know from working in the clinic in this nonprofit organization, having this patient-centered approach, that we are not volume-based driven. We're focused on patient outcomes. So I knew that the way we train our doctors, which we provide a standardized training so that everybody approaches the patient in a similar manner when it comes to the mechanic of the fit, I knew that the data that we were harvesting and keeping in this powerful database in the lab would be good data. And so at a time where AI was not even talked about, at least not in most circuits, definitely, I lean in on data, and we were able to develop the first data-driven scleral lens design. And we have kept feeding that lens design based on data. At the time, maybe the iPhone was sort of the innovation that was using data to come up with innovations. And because of that science background, I was able to go the different way and come up with something completely novel in 2017. So much so that today in the industry, many others are following suit. And even in their branding, they claim and highlight the data-driven benefits of their lenses. But BostonSight was, again, once more a pioneer. And I really think that science background is what, helps potentiate these outcomes. So everything is meant to be. Everything is meant to be.
So you're looking at it with the right lens. You had that background and that data perspective on that you saw potential to leverage that and to turn that into unique innovations.
Right. Not knowing what we were going to find.
Right.
But it was an approach that I thought it was worth taking, and let's just follow the evidence and see what we find. And long and behold, we were amazingly surprised, led to patents and, but the most important thing is the development of something novel that empowers practitioners. Because it's data driven, your starting point is so much closer to the end point. So you're helping practitioners adapt the technology sooner, but ultimately the patient benefits, because again, you're backed up by science, by evidence. It's evidence-based innovation. So it's really, really fascinating.
So when you look at all of this, and I'm thinking of the ecosystem that you're in at BostonSight, and of course amplified by FitAcademy, but BostonSight, what do you think allows for this sense of accelerated purpose at BostonSight? Is it the fact that people are there because they want to be there? Is it everyone's a great team player? Egos checked at the door? What do you think is part of the secret sauce that makes this organization work so well?
Honestly believe is that we are very mission driven. The folks that are in that organization, they are motivated by the mission. We go to our goals, strategic initiatives. We go back to our mission. Obviously you want to generate revenue. Obviously there's some secondary, tertiary benefits that we all look to strive for and to achieve, right? But I truly believe that these innovations, these research initiatives, the way we approach patients, the outcomes that we achieve is because the individuals and the organization at large is extremely mission driven. And so if you go back to your mission, I think it's a win, because if it's so rooted in the mission, innovation, education, research, patient-centered care, if everything that you do and you're moving along and you go back to the mission, you stay the course. You stay the course. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are challenges with a small organization, especially nonprofit organization. We have to be very savvy about budgets and resource utilization, right? But again, we go back to the mission, and so far we create magic, if so I must say. I mean, in my opinion, at least.
Well, it's a shortcut to purpose around why are we here. And if everyone is there for more the same reason than not, then you're going to get alignment, and you don't have to work so hard to get everyone around the campfire, because we're already there because we're drawn to the mission.
Right.
And it seems like that's just a performance advantage for BostonSight, is that, if you chose to be here, if you followed, if you were the moth that came to the flame, you've selected yourself. You've left,
Exactly.
Ego and all of that at the door. It doesn't mean you don't have a sense of ego, but
Right.
you're not going to let it get in the way of mission, or at least that's what I'm intuiting from what you're saying.
Absolutely.
So my domain is communication. A lot of times I share with people, or a pain point for a lot of my clients in biotech, life sciences, and healthcare is, how do I get attention for this initiative in a way that's appropriate to the level of urgency? So if it's a project X, I need to frame it for leadership in the right way with the right data. I'm wondering about the value of communication at BostonSight, because you have, like any organization, many competing priorities. You're managing budgets and patient needs, and the lab and the clinic and all of that. How important is communication in terms of your leadership and connecting your team to the mission and purpose? And I'd love to know what you do or how you think about it as an organization or as an individual.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. It starts very, very high level. We are very fortunate to have a great team, a business development team, communications, marketing. So from the very, very top, distributing the message internally, outside, we have an amazing team. And it's extremely important. But, then boiling down more into the smaller groups, a small organization also allows you flexibility. There's not a lot of bureaucracy in a smaller organization. So you're more malleable, more flexible to adjust. So we can meet, and we do meet as a team pretty regularly. For example, with my reports, I meet with them every 2 weeks, just on one-on-one meetings. I meet with my CEO every 2 weeks. And like that, all of the teams across the organizations have this culture of this bi-weekly meetings on a one-on-one. So you keep that, other than the day-to-day communications, but by having that model of, every 2 weeks, meeting and having that one-on-one engagement, not only can you help potentiate each other, like the goals that you may set, not only for that particular month or quarter or year, etc., long-term projects, but also one-on-one checkings. How are you doing? Are there things that we can do to course correct, improve, etc.? So it keeps you in check. And so I believe that that is a benefit of a small organization. Sometimes with bureaucracy or larger teams, you may not be able to have, for example, with your CEO, the time to meet every 2 weeks, because the CEO is busy doing so many other things, right? And so again, there's pros and cons, but communication, to your point, we do believe is extremely important. And so we implement it like that in our teams, just to keep our initiatives moving forward, and just to keep a check-in with ourselves to make sure that things are okay. And when things are not that great, allow ourselves to course correct.
So talk to me about that for a minute, because we all know that life is about getting honest and transparent messages from people who care about us and can also show us the path forward. So I remember, Adam Grant, the organizational psychologist, said that before you get any feedback from anybody, you have to ask if they are an expert in the area, if they care about you, and they have actionable steps forward. Is there a clear path forward? And so I'm curious how you think about that, because whether it's reporting up to your CEO or your team reporting to you, or peers or colleagues, how do you think about, and I don't want to say critical, but giving the right message so that they understand how to course correct, because we can't just assume it will happen.
You mean the course correction?
Yeah, sure. So when there's good news is always great to hear.
Right.
Bad news, we have to be transparent and upfront. But then there's somewhere in the middle. We can do this better, or how do we improve? How do you think about that in terms of, coaching others or giving feedback in a meaningful way to ensure that the mission is on track and you're being the best you can be, because that's all we can do.
Absolutely. And you're right. You have to find sort of a balance, but you need to be as transparent as possible. You can say the same thing that is truthful in nature, but your delivery matters. So it's like they say, it's not necessarily only what you say, but how you say it. But it's important to still say it in order to either course correct or get the best out of people. I believe, for myself and for my reports, I always try to see the best in what each of the individuals in my team brings. As a collective, I believe we have an amazing team, but each of the individual reports, there's a reason why we hire them. And I always go back to, what is the good in them? I mean, nobody's perfect. For God's sake, I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect. So, but just being genuine with the report, or up with my CEO, just being very genuine, being transparent. I do believe that is important. And I've gone through episodes and moments where we have had to do course correction of different types with my reports. And it starts, even though I'm in a supervisory role, I don't lead with power that, I'm here and you're there. I'd like to see them, right where they are. I'd like to meet them where they are, but also it's a matter of understanding. I strive to hopefully make them understand either what is the issue that needs the course correction, or what's the matter that we should shift or recalibrate. We're probably digressing. Let's come back and regroup. So trying to make them understand, usually that has worked for me. And I don't need to tell them exactly what they need to do, but if I make them or help them understand what is the issue at hand, usually they course correct on their own. And I believe that's the same for me when I have had to course correct myself.
Yeah, I love that. And what resonates for me is you say what needs to be said, but you're careful with how you do that.
Yeah.
To care for somebody.
Yeah.
And I give advice to my clients at times where I say, you might be fearful or nervous to deliver this news, but if you aren't delivering it and you were counseling other people to do it, what would you tell them? And they usually say something like, I would say that this must be shared. And I'm like, that's right. That's the truth. And so you have to find a way to share what is true, but also be respectful and keep those relationships.
The way I see it is that, and that's just how I function, I act with conviction. So conviction is my north. So if there's a conviction either of what is the goal for the organization, or a conviction about, certain attitudes or behaviors, I act with conviction, but you don't need to put anybody down. Conviction can be your north. You can deliver the message. You need to have courage to deliver the message, But conviction will allow you, in my opinion, to have that courage to deliver the message in the best way possible to get the outcomes that you need. Because in the end, everybody's here for the same reason. If we need to course correct, just say it in a way that they understand, you'll get the outcomes that you want. I'm pretty sure.
Belief is not binary. It's not you believe or you don't. You can find more ways to believe. That conviction drives it.
Absolutely.
All right. 2 more questions for you. This is phenomenal. When you look at the next chapter in BostonSight, in FitAcademy, what gets you most excited for this next phase coming up?
For me is potentiating the impact, growing the program so that more people can benefit. It moves me. Creating impact moves me. And ultimately, I said it before, this opportunity to pass it forward to me is just amazing. So when I think about FitAcademy and the plans that we have, at the core of it is this notion of passing it forward. It goes back to that conviction that I just mentioned, because I have this conviction that in doing so, empowering others is going to downstream help so many more patients. And at the end of the day, it all starts and ends with patients at the heart of it. And so I'm just excited to see where we're going to take this program, grow it, take it globally. We partner with our global partners and distributors to help bring this program to more countries. And, if at the end of it, if nothing else, Stuart, I have this sense or realization that I contributed, creating impact by helping patients globally, I'm just a privileged and lucky person. And so I'm just going to strive to do that.
Well, it's not only inspiring, but you said passing it forward. And I think about the multiplier effect, because if you go from 3 and everyone passes it to 1, we're quickly at 9 and then 27, and it just goes. And how many more people like that young boy from Puerto Rico whose life changed will this affect globally? And that sense of impact, that sense of purpose, you are an inspiration here. And I love what you're doing. And
Thank you.
I think every day must be an exciting, different adventure. Not easy, nothing simple, but worth doing.
Absolutely.
So my last question is an open one, because I want to ask you, is there anything I did not ask you about that you wanted to mention or touch on or share with the audience?
Again, thank you for the opportunity. Since our theme has revolved around creating impact, acting with conviction, staying true to your core values, I'd say that for someone who might be listening that is struggling with what they're going through at their careers and may find or think that maybe they've lost meaning in what they're doing for work, just know that you're not alone. And many, many professionals at some point in their careers may have felt this way, but see it as an opportunity. Be grateful for it, because sometimes you can harness that feeling and use it as a turning point. And, be grateful that you're perhaps listening to a whisper. Something is telling you that perhaps you're losing meaning in work because you're going away from your core values or what gives you sense and purpose. Maybe you started there, but now not anymore. This could be an opportunity, not to feel down, but perhaps how can I use this as a turning point to then see what is it that I really want? What is my sense of purpose? What are my core values? And again, course correct. Use it as an opportunity to go back to your roots and then do better. So that's what I would end with, and go back to hopefully creating impact. I think that's very moving, and creating impact is very broad. It could be in any field. So hopefully everybody has a sense of purpose in creating impact in what they do.
Yeah, I love that. And it's such an elegant way you said that. And what I get from that is that if your light has dimmed, find the purpose and get back to creating an impact in the way you see it, because you are aligned with your purpose. It is clear. And if people feel less than that, the answer is probably within. And so use that information.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Dr. Karen Carrasquillo Miranda, if I pronounced that correctly, you can laugh at me. But it's just been a pleasure to speak with you. And I've just learned so much. And I'm also being extra cautious, protecting my eyes as I go through life and age. And I really want to hold on to my vision so I can enjoy all parts of it. And so I just thank you for your time. And where should people go if they want to learn more about FitAcademy or BostonSight or follow your adventures in this world?
Thank you again for the opportunity, Stuart.
My pleasure.
If for those that want to learn more, you can visit our website, bostonsight.org.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you, Dr. Karen Carrasquillo Miranda. Thank you for being on the show. Wonderful to see you. And until we meet soon, I hope.
Again,
right.
Hopefully soon. Thank you.
Subscribe at dnate.com to get access to our cutting-edge research, expert insights, and deep dives with industry leaders shaping the future of biotech. You've been listening to a podcast production from dnate.com. All rights reserved.